Welcome to part 3 of Jane Eyre Reimagined, as we continue the classic book and reimagine it in the style of best-selling author Margaret Atwood. If you enjoy this content, please take a minute to like, subscribe, or share this video. You can also hit the bell to be notified of new classic books reimagined as soon as they are published here on YouTube. If there is a classic book you would like to hear reimagined in the style of a modern author, please leave it in the comments.
Chapter 18, Revelations and Charades. Merry days, busy days, these at Thornfield Hall were unlike the sombre solitude of my first 3 months here. Gone were the shadows of melancholy. Every corner bustled with life. The gallery echoed with the rustle of ladies' gowns, and the hallways teemed with smart valets and lively maids. Even the kitchen and servants' quarters hummed with activity. The weather, whether sun-drenched or rain-soaked, could not dampen the newfound gaiety that infused every room. The first evening a change in entertainment was proposed. I wondered what they meant by playing charades. Unfamiliar with the term, I watched as the dining room was transformed. Tables were wheeled away, chairs arranged in a semicircle, and servants scurried to and fro under Mr. Rochester's direction. The ladies dashed upstairs, summoning their maids, while Mrs. Fairfax was consulted on the house's store of shawls and draperies. Soon, armfuls of brocaded and hooped petticoats, satin sacques, and lace lappets descended from the third-story wardrobes, brought down by Abigail's. Mr. Rochester gathered the ladies around him, selecting his team. Miss Ingram, of course, the 2 Mrs. Eshton, and Mrs. Dent. He glanced at me as I fastened the clasp of Mrs. Dent's bracelet. "Will you play?" he asked. I shook my head, relieved when he did not press the matter and allowed me to return to my seat. The curtain rose, revealing Sir George Lynn shrouded in a white sheet, Amy Eshton draped in Mr. Rochester's cloak, and Adele scattering flowers. Miss Ingram, resplendent in white with a wreath of roses, knelt beside Mr. Rochester. The pantomime of a marriage unfolded, and the curtain fell to Colonel Dent's triumphant cry of "Bride!" A more elaborate scene followed, with Mr. Rochester in shawls and a turban beside a marble basin, and Miss Ingram as an Oriental princess. The tableau of Eleazar and Rebecca played out before the spectators, who struggled to guess the charade. Finally, Mr. Rochester appeared as a chain-clad prisoner, a grim tableau that prompted Colonel Dent's shout of "Bridewell!" Miss Ingram and Mr. Rochester, resuming their places, exchanged witty banter. "You would have made a fine highwayman," she said, admiring his acting. "But the soot suits you." "You prefer a rogue to a gentleman?" he teased. "An English hero of the road is almost as good as an Italian bandit," she replied with a laugh. As the evening progressed, I watched the actors less and the audience more. My eyes, drawn to the semicircle of chairs, lingered on Mr. Rochester and Miss Ingram. Her head inclined towards him, their whispers and exchanged glances igniting a pang in my heart. I have told you, reader, that I had learned to love Mr. Rochester. How could I unlove him now, even as his attentions turned to a woman who scorned to touch me with the hem of her dress? Miss Ingram's pride and self-assurance in her position as his future bride only deepened my despair. Yet, I could not be jealous. She was a poor match for him, her mind and heart barren of true feeling. I saw that Mr. Rochester's courtship was driven by practical considerations, not passion. Her rank and connections suited his needs, but she could not charm him. This realization was my torment. If she had won his love sincerely, I would have retreated, acknowledged her superiority, and found peace. But her vain attempts to captivate him, her superficial charms, only highlighted what she lacked. While Miss Ingram flaunted her airs and graces, I noted Mr. Rochester's keen observation of her flaws. He saw through her, yet proceeded with their match for reasons beyond my understanding. His decision to marry her for interest and connections baffled me, yet I could not condemn him. Their world adhered to principles foreign to mine. Thornfield buzzed with talk of the impending marriage. Miss Ingram's efforts to win Mr. Rochester were clumsy and transparent. I watched in silent agony, knowing how easily another could succeed where she failed. One day, with Mr. Rochester absent on business, the house felt particularly lifeless. A proposed visit to a nearby gypsy camp was deferred due to rain. The younger guests played billiards. The older ladies played cards. Miss Ingram, after rebuffing attempts at conversation, lounged with a novel, her boredom palpable. It was near dusk when Adele spotted a post-chaise approaching. Miss Ingram, excited, declared it must be Mr. Rochester. But it was a stranger, a tall, fashionable man. His arrival disrupted the household, stirring curiosity and speculation. The newcomer, Mr. Mason, was from the West Indies. His sallow complexion and wandering eye gave him an unsettling appearance. His conversation hinted at a long acquaintance with Mr. Rochester, further piquing my curiosity. That evening, amidst the guests' laughter, I overheard snippets of conversation. Mr. Mason spoke of Jamaica, and I learned he had known Mr. Rochester there. His presence cast a shadow over the gathering, a sense of foreboding settling over me. The next day, during a break in the rain, I learned from the servants that a gypsy woman had arrived, insisting on telling fortunes. Miss Ingram, curious and defiant, demanded to see her. The rest of the company eagerly followed suit, their excitement palpable. One by one, the young ladies visited the gypsy, returning with varying degrees of excitement and fear. When my turn came, I slipped into the library, eager to uncover the mystery. The library, dimly lit by the fire, seemed almost otherworldly. The gypsy, shrouded in a red cloak and black bonnet, sat by the hearth, reading from a small black book. As I entered, she did not look up immediately, allowing me to observe her. "Do you want your fortune told?" she asked, her voice harsh and commanding. "I have no faith in fortunes," I replied. "Yet you come," she said, a knowing smile playing on her lips. "You are cold, sick, and silly." "Prove it," I challenged. She studied me intently, then declared, "You are alone. The best feelings keep far from you because you do not seek them. You could be happy if you reached out for it, but you hesitate." "What do you mean?" I asked, feeling a shiver run down my spine. "Your heart is guarded, locked away," she continued. "You are cold because you fear warmth. You are sick because you deny yourself the cure. And you are silly because you refuse to see the truth." "Tell me then, what is the truth?" I demanded, more intrigued than ever. She leaned closer, her eyes piercing into mine. "The truth is, you are in love with a man who is blind to your worth. You watch him with another, your heart aching with every glance, yet you do nothing." The gypsy's words unsettled me. She seemed to know too much, her insights too precise. I knelt before her, and she examined my face closely. "Your future is uncertain," she said. "Happiness is within your reach, but you must decide to grasp it." "I don't understand," I whispered. "You are stronger than you believe," she replied, "but you must find the courage to take what you want. Do not let fear dictate your fate." Her voice grew familiar, her demeanor changed. Suddenly, I recognized the figure before me. "Mr. Rochester!" I exclaimed. He removed his disguise, revealing himself. "Do you forgive me, Jane?" he asked. "Forgive you?" I repeated, still in shock. "For what?" "For testing you, for wanting to understand you better," he said. "Why would you do such a thing?" I asked, trying to grasp the situation. "I needed to know," he said, his voice softening. "I needed to see if you felt as I do, if you could see beyond the surface." "You could have asked," I replied, feeling a mixture of relief and frustration. "Would you have answered truthfully?" he countered. "Sometimes, Jane, we need to see the truth ourselves." Our conversation turned to the stranger, Mr. Mason. "Mason from the West Indies," Mr. Rochester muttered, his demeanor shifting to one of anxiety. "Jane, fetch me a glass of wine and see what he is doing." I did as he asked, noting the guests' continued gaiety and Mr. Mason's easy demeanor. Returning with the wine, I relayed my observations. Mr. Rochester's pallor had returned, but he steadied himself. "If they all turned against me, would you stay, Jane?" he asked. "Yes, sir," I replied without hesitation. "Why?" he asked, his eyes searching mine. "Because I believe in you," I said simply. "Because you are worth it." "Go back now and tell Mason I wish to see him," he instructed. I delivered the message, and as Mr. Mason entered the library, I saw the tension in Mr. Rochester's face. The night deepened, and I knew that beneath the surface of Thornfield's merriment, darker currents were at play. The house, once a place of solitude, was now a stage for secrets and revelations, where every gesture and glance carried weight. The library, dimly lit by the fire, seemed almost otherworldly. The gypsy, shrouded in a red cloak and black bonnet, sat by the hearth, reading from a small black book. As I entered, she did not look up immediately, allowing me to observe her. "Do you want your fortune told?" she asked, her voice harsh and commanding. "I have no faith in fortunes," I replied. "Yet you come," she said, a knowing smile playing on her lips. "You are cold, sick, and silly." "Prove it," I challenged. She studied me intently, then declared, "You are alone. The best feelings keep far from you because you do not seek them. You could be happy if you reached out for it, but you hesitate." "What do you mean?" I asked, feeling a shiver run down my spine. "Your heart is guarded, locked away," she continued. "You are cold because you fear warmth. You are sick because you deny yourself the cure. And you are silly because you refuse to see the truth." "Tell me then, what is the truth?" I demanded, more intrigued than ever. She leaned closer, her eyes piercing into mine. "The truth is, you are in love with a man who is blind to your worth. You watch him with another, your heart aching with every glance, yet you do nothing." The gypsy's words unsettled me. She seemed to know too much, her insights too precise. I knelt before her, and she examined my face closely. "Your future is uncertain," she said. "Happiness is within your reach, but you must decide to grasp it." "I don't understand," I whispered. "You are stronger than you believe," she replied. "But you must find the courage to take what you want. Do not let fear dictate your fate." Her voice grew familiar, her demeanor changed. Suddenly, I recognized the figure before me. "Mr. Rochester!" I exclaimed. He removed his disguise, revealing himself. "Do you forgive me, Jane?" he asked. "Forgive you?" I repeated, still in shock. "For what?" "For testing you, for wanting to understand you better," he said. "Why would you do such a thing?" I asked, trying to grasp the situation. "I needed to know," he said, his voice softening. "I needed to see if you felt as I do, if you could see beyond the surface." "You could have asked," I replied, feeling a mixture of relief and frustration. "Would you have answered truthfully?" he countered. "Sometimes, Jane, we need to see the truth ourselves." Our conversation turned to the stranger, Mr. Mason. "Mason from the West Indies," Mr. Rochester muttered, his demeanor shifting to one of anxiety. "Jane, fetch me a glass of wine and see what he is doing." I did as he asked, noting the guest's continued gaiety and Mr. Mason's easy demeanor. Returning with the wine, I relayed my observations. Mr. Rochester's pallor had returned, but he steadied himself. "If they all turned against me, would you stay, Jane?" he asked. "Yes, sir," I replied without hesitation. "Why?" he asked, his eyes searching mine. "Because I believe in you," I said simply. "Because you are worth it." "Go back now and tell Mason I wish to see him," he instructed. I delivered the message, and as Mr. Mason entered the library, I saw the tension in Mr. Rochester's face. The night deepened, and I knew that beneath the surface of Thornfield's merriment, darker currents were at play. The house, once a place of solitude, was now a stage for secrets and revelations, where every gesture and glance carried weight. Chapter 19. Veils of Destiny. The library, a refugee from the cacophony of the drawing room, lay quiet and shadowed as I stepped inside. The air was thick with the scent of old books and the dying embers in the hearth. There, nestled in an armchair by the fireplace, sat the Sibyl, If Sibyl she truly was, she wore her role well, clad in a red cloak and a black bonnet, or rather, a broad-brimmed gypsy hat tied with a striped handkerchief under her chin. A spent candle stood on the table, its wick charred and useless. She leaned over the fire, her face illuminated by the flickering flames as she read from a small, worn book, perhaps a prayer book, though her muttering was far from holy. I stood on the rug, feeling the warmth of the fire seep into my chilled hands, the coldness from my earlier detachment dissipating. The Sibyl's presence, though uncanny, did not disturb me. She finished her reading, closed the book with a deliberate snap, and looked up slowly. Her face, partially obscured by the brim of her hat, was a landscape of shadows and angles. Her eyes met mine with a directness that brooked no evasion. "So you seek your fortune?" she said, her voice rough, scraping against the silence like a match striking flint. "Not particularly, mother. You may amuse yourself as you please. But I should warn you, I have no faith in such matters." Typical impudence. I expected as much from your step across the threshold. You have a keen ear. I have more than that, a quick eye and a sharper mind. Necessary skills in your line of work. Indeed, especially with clients like you. Why don't you tremble? I'm not cold. Why don't you turn pale? I'm not ill. Why don't you consult my art? I'm not a fool. She chuckled, a dry, mirthless sound that rustled like dead leaves. She produced a short black pipe, lit it, and inhaled deeply before speaking again. "You are cold, you are sick, and you are a fool." "Prove it," I challenged. "I will, in a few words. You are cold because you are alone. No spark has kindled the fire within you. You are sick because the highest, sweetest emotions are kept at bay. You are a fool because, despite your suffering, you neither reach for nor welcome them when they draw near." She puffed on her pipe, her eyes reflecting the firelight with an unsettling intensity. "You could say that about anyone living in solitude." "True, but is it true for everyone?" "In my situation, yes." "Perhaps, but yours is a unique solitude. You stand on the brink of happiness, within reach of it. The pieces are scattered, but a single movement could bring them together. Fate has placed them carefully, waiting for you to act. I don't understand riddles. I've never been good at them. If you want clarity, show me your palm. And I must cross it with silver, I presume?" "Of course." I handed her a shilling, which she tucked into an old stocking foot from her pocket. She told me to hold out my hand and studied it intently without touching. "Too fine," she said. "Such hands reveal little. Destiny isn't etched there." "I believe you." "No, it's in the face. The forehead, the eyes, the mouth. Kneel, lift your head." "Now we're getting somewhere," I said, complying. "Perhaps you'll convince me yet." I knelt before her, the fire's warmth on my face, casting her own into deeper shadow. "I wonder with what feelings you came to me tonight," she said, studying my face. "What thoughts occupy your heart in that room, surrounded by people who flit about like ghosts in a lantern show, offering no real connection?" "I feel tired often, sleepy sometimes, but rarely sad." "Then you must have a secret hope buoying you." "No, I only hope to save enough to open a small school someday." "A mean sustenance for the spirit, sitting in that window seat. Yes, I know your habits." "You learned them from the servants." "Perhaps. Mrs. Poole is an acquaintance." I started at the name, thoughts of dark deeds and hidden truths flashing through my mind. "Don't be alarmed, she's trustworthy. But as I was saying, do you think only of your future school? Do none of the company in that room interest you? Is there not one face you study more closely? One figure you follow?" "I observe them all." "Do you never single out one or two?" "I do, when their gestures or looks tell a story. It amuses me." "What stories do you prefer?" "They're all the same, courtship, ending in marriage." "And you find that dull?" "I do. It means nothing to me." "Nothing? Not even when a young, beautiful, wealthy lady smiles at a gentleman you know?" "I don't know the gentlemen. I've scarcely spoken to any of them. They are free to receive any smiles without my concern. You don't know the master of the house? He's not at home. A clever dodge. He went to Millcote and will return tonight or tomorrow. Does that exclude him from your acquaintance? No, but what is he to do with your theme? Ladies smiling at gentlemen. Mr. Rochester has received many such smiles lately, haven't you noticed? He has the right to enjoy his guests' company. Of course, but have you not observed that he receives more attention than others? The eagerness of the listener quickens the narrator's tongue. Indeed, Mr. Rochester has listened intently to a particular lady's charms. Have you seen this? I haven't seen gratitude in his face. Analysing him, are you? What did you see? I remained silent. You've seen love, haven't you? And you imagine his future bride's happiness. Your skill falters. I came for my fortune, not to confess. Is Mr. Rochester truly to marry? Yes, to the beautiful Miss Ingram. Soon? Appearances suggest so. Though you seem sceptical, they will be a happy pair. She must love him, or at least his wealth. I told her something earlier that made her frown. Her suitor should be cautious. But I came for my fortune, not his. You've told me nothing. Your future is uncertain. Happiness is near, but you must reach for it. Kneel again. Don't keep me long. The fire scorches. She leaned back, muttering, as she examined me. The flame flickers in your eye, soft and full of feeling. It smiles at my words, but sadness lies beneath. Your pride and reserve confirm my opinion. Your mouth, flexible and ready to laugh, craves human affection. The enemy is your brow, declaring you can live alone, holding feelings in check. Your forehead reveals reason's control, a fortress against passion. Well said, forehead. Your declaration is respected. I have acted as I vowed, but further might break me. Rise, Miss Eyre. The play is over. Was I dreaming? The voice had changed, the gestures familiar. I got up, but hesitated. The fire illuminated her hand, smooth, youthful. A gem flashed on her finger. I recognized the ring. Well, Jane, do you know me? Asked the familiar voice. Remove the cloak, sir, and... The knot is tight. Help me. Break it, sir. Off your lendings. Mr. Rochester stepped out of his disguise. What a strange idea! But well executed, don't you think? With the ladies, perhaps? But not with you. You didn't play the gypsy with me. What did I play? Yourself, in some unaccountable way. You drew me out, or in. It wasn't fair. Do you forgive me, Jane? I can't say until I've thought it over. If I've made no great fool of myself, I'll try to forgive you. But it wasn't right. You were very correct and sensible. I reflected and felt reassured. I had suspected a masquerade, noting the feigned voice and concealed features. Grace Poole had been on my mind. I hadn't thought of Mr. Rochester. What are you musing about? What does that grave smile mean? Wonder and self-congratulation, sir. May I go now? No, stay. Tell me what the others are doing. Discussing the gypsy, I imagine. Sit down. Let me hear what they said about me. It's late. Oh, did you know a stranger arrived today? A stranger who? He said he knew you well and would wait until you returned. The devil he did. His name? Mason, from Spanish Town, Jamaica. Mr. Rochester gripped my wrist, his smile vanishing. Mason! The West Indies! He repeated the words, growing paler. Are you ill, sir? Jane, I've had a shock. Lean on me, sir. Jane, you offered your shoulder before. Let me have it now. Yes, sir. He sat, holding my hand, his look troubled. My little friend, I wish we were on a quiet island, far from trouble. Can I help you, sir? Jane, I'll seek your help if needed. Thank you. Tell me what to do. Fetch me a glass of wine. See if Mason is with the others and what he is doing, I went, finding the party lively. Mason chatted by the fire. I returned with the wine. To your health, ministrant spirit, he said, drinking. What are they doing? Laughing and talking. They don't look grave. No, sir. And Mason? He was laughing too. If they spat at me, what would you do, Jane? Turn them out, sir. He half smiled. If they left me one by one? I'd stay with you. To comfort me? Yes, sir. If they censured you? I'd care nothing for it. Go back, tell Mason I'm here and bring him. I did so, and later I heard Mr. Rochester's voice, cheerful, setting my heart at ease. I soon fell asleep, but the night had left me with a sense of unease, of secrets revealed and more yet to come. Thornfield, with its hidden depths, had become a stage for truths and half-truths, where every glance carried weight and every gesture hinted at unseen currents. Chapter 20. The Shrieking House. I had neglected to draw my curtains, to shield myself from the all-seeing eye of the moon. It was full, luminous, its gaze unyielding as it moved into the sky opposite my window. The moon's stare was a harsh mistress, waking me with her silver-white light. Beautiful, yes, but too solemn, too penetrating. I half rose, arm outstretched to draw the curtain, when— Good God, what a cry! The night stillness, the serene silence, was shattered by a sound so savage, so sharp, it cleaved the air like a knife through silk. My pulse stopped, my heart froze, my arm hung useless. The cry faded, replaced by an eerie quiet. The being that emitted such a shriek would need to rest before it could summon the strength for another. It came from the third floor, the attic, passing directly overhead. I now heard a struggle, desperate and deadly, followed by a half-smothered shout. "Help! Help! Help!" "Will no one come?" the voice cried, as if expecting salvation from the heavens. Amidst the stamping and staggering, I heard clearly, "Rochester! Rochester! For God's sake, come!" A chamber door flung open. Footsteps rushed along the gallery. Another step stamped on the floor above. Something fell, and silence returned. Horror shook my limbs, but I managed to dress. The entire house was roused. Terrified murmurs filled the air. Doors flew open, and the gallery filled with confused, dishevelled guests. "What happened? Who is hurt? Is it fire? Are there robbers?" they demanded in a cacophony of fear. The moonlight was our only guide in the darkness. "Where the devil is Rochester?" cried Colonel Dent, his voice cutting through the chaos. "Here, here," came the reply. "Be composed, all of you. I'm coming." The door at the end of the gallery opened, and Mr. Rochester advanced, candle in hand. Miss Ingram, ever dramatic, seized his arm. "What awful event has taken place? Speak. Let us know the worst at once." "But don't pull me down or strangle me," he replied, shaking off the Mrs. Eshton and the dowagers bearing down on him. "All's right. All's right. A mere rehearsal of much ado about nothing. A servant has had a nightmare. She's excitable, nervous. Dreamed she saw an apparition. Now, ladies, return to your rooms. Gentlemen, set the example." By coaxing and commanding, he restored order, ushering everyone back to their quarters. I retreated unnoticed, not to bed, but to sit by the window, dressed and alert, waiting. The cry, the struggle, the call. Something must follow. But nothing did. Silence reclaimed Thornfield Hall. The moon declined, shadows lengthened, and the house settled into uneasy quiet. I was about to lie down when a cautious hand tapped at my door. "Am I wanted?" I asked. "Are you up?" came Mr. Rochester's voice. "Yes, sir." "And dressed?" "Yes." "Come out then, quietly." I obeyed, finding him in the gallery, candle in hand. "I need you. Come this way. Make no noise." We moved stealthily through the dark corridor, up the stairs to the fateful third story. He stopped and whispered, "Do you have a sponge in your room?" "Yes, sir." "And salts, volatile salts?" "Yes." "Fetch both." I did as he asked. When I returned, he stood by a small black door, key in hand. "You don't faint at the sight of blood?" "I don't think so." He took my hand, feeling for steadiness. "Warm and steady," he remarked, and opened the door. The room, familiar yet different, was hung with tapestry, now looped up to reveal a concealed door, open and emitting light. Inside, I heard a snarling sound, almost animalistic. Mr. Rochester went ahead. A shout of laughter greeted him. Grace Poole's laugh. She was there. After a low conversation, he returned. "Here, Jane," he said. I followed him to a large bed, curtains drawn. A man sat in an easy chair, pale eyes closed. Mr. Mason, soaked in blood. "Hold the candle," Mr. Rochester instructed. I held it while he fetched a basin of water and began sponging the blood from Mason's face. "Is there immediate danger?" Mason murmured. "Pooh, no, a mere scratch. Bear up. Jane, I must leave you with this gentleman. Sponge the blood, offer water if he faints, but no talking. Understand? Richard, it's your life if you speak." Mason groaned but remained still. I took the sponge, my heart racing. Mr. Rochester left, locking the door behind him. There I was in the third-story room, alone with a bleeding man and the eerie spectre of Grace Poole. I had to keep watch, sponge the blood, and wait. The candle's light flickered, casting strange shadows on the tapestry. The faces of the 12 apostles carved in a cabinet seemed to come alive, reflecting my own dread. What crime was this, lurking in Thornfield Hall, breaking out in fire and blood? What creature was masked as an ordinary woman, uttering sounds of a demon? And Mr. Mason, how did he fit into this web of horror? Mr. Rochester's return broke the silence. With him was a surgeon, Carter. "Carter, hurry!" he commanded. "I give you half an hour to dress the wound and get the patient downstairs." "But is he fit to move?" Carter asked. Yes, it's nothing serious. Come, set to work." He pulled back the curtain, letting in the dawn light. It was a relief to see the sun rising. Mr. Rochester approached Mason. "How are you?" "She's done for me," Mason replied faintly. "Not at all. You'll be fine. Carter, reassure him." Carter examined the wounds. "The flesh is torn. Teeth marks." "She bit me," Mason whispered. "Worried me like a tigress." "You should have grappled with her," Mr. Rochester said. "You might have waited for me." "I thought I could help." "You thought? Foolish! Carter, hurry!" Mr. Rochester directed me to fetch items for Mason's departure. When I returned, Mason was bandaged and given a dose of a crimson liquid. "Drink, Richard," Mr. Rochester urged. "It will give you strength." Mason drank and was helped to his feet. Mr. Rochester took his arm. "Jane, go ahead. Unbolt the side door. Tell the driver we're coming." I did as instructed, finding the yard silent, the chaise ready. The gentleman followed, helping Mason into the chaise. "Take care of him, Carter," Mr. Rochester said. "I'll visit soon. Richard, how are you?" "The fresh air revives me, Fairfax." "Goodbye, Dick." "Fairfax, take care of her," Mason said, tears in his eyes. "I do my best," Mr. Rochester replied. The chaise drove away. "Would to God this were all over," Mr. Rochester muttered, closing the gates. He moved towards a door in the orchard wall, and I thought he was done with me. But he called, "Jane!" He stood, waiting. "Come where there is some freshness," he said. "That house is a dungeon." "It seems splendid to me," I replied. "The glamour of inexperience. Here, all is real, sweet, and pure." We walked through a garden, the morning sun illuminating the dewy flowers. He picked a half-blown rose and offered it to me. "Thank you, sir." "Do you like this sunrise, Jane?" "Very much." "You've had a strange night." "Yes, sir." "Did it frighten you?" "I was afraid someone would come out of the inner room." "I had the key. You were safe." "Will Grace Poole stay here?" "Oh, yes, don't worry about her." "But your life seems insecure with her here." "Never fear. I'll take care of myself." "Is the danger gone now?" "I can't be sure until Mason leaves England. To live, for me, is to stand on a volcano." "Mr. Mason is easily led. He won't defy you." True, but one careless word could ruin me. I can't warn him. He laughed, took my hand, and quickly let it go. You're my friend, aren't you? I like to serve you. You do. You have power over me. You could hurt me, but I won't show where. If you fear no more from Mr. Mason than from me, you are safe. God grant it. Here's an arbour. Sit. I sat beside him. Now, my little friend, imagine you're a wild boy, indulged from childhood, committing a capital error in a foreign land. You seek relief through unusual but lawful means. You return, find a stranger with qualities you've sought, and desire to change your life. Are you justified in breaking convention to secure your happiness? Men and women die. Philosophers and Christians falter. If someone has suffered and erred, let them look higher than their equals for strength. But the instrument, God ordains it. I've been a restless man, but I believe I've found my cure in... He paused. The bird sang on. Little friend, he said, his tone changing, you've noticed my penchant for Miss Ingram. If I married her, she'd regenerate me with a vengeance. He walked away, humming. Jane, you're pale. Don't you curse me for disturbing your rest? Curse you? No, sir. Shake hands. What cold fingers. They were warmer last night. Jane, when will you watch with me again? Whenever I can be useful. The night before I'm married. Will you sit out with me? Yes, sir. She's a rare one, isn't she? Yes, sir. A real strapper. There's Dent and Lynn. Go in by the shrubbery. As I went one way, he went another, his voice cheerful. Mason left before sunrise. I rose at 4 to see him off. Chapter 21. Omens and Echoes. Omens are peculiar things, signs, sympathies, all tangled in a web humanity has yet to unravel. I've never dismissed them, having felt their eerie presence myself. Signs may be nature's whispers to mankind, and sympathies, those invisible threads connecting distant souls. When I was 6, I overheard Bessie Levin telling Martha Abbott that dreaming of children portends trouble. The next day, Bessie was summoned home to her dying sister. That memory never faded. Lately, a nightly dream of a child haunted me, sometimes laughing, sometimes crying, always present. 7 nights in succession, this phantom baby appeared, filling me with a creeping dread. I grew anxious as night approached, dreading the hour of my spectral visitation. From this dream, I was roused on that moonlit night when I heard the cry. The next afternoon, I was summoned to Mrs. Fairfax's room, where a man waited, dressed in mourning, his crape-bound hat held in hand. I doubt you remember me, miss, he began, standing as I entered. I'm Robert Levin, coachman at Gateshead. I lived there when you were a child. Robert, of course, I remember you. How is Bessie? Are you married? Yes, miss. We have 3 children now, and both Bessie and the baby are thriving. And the family at Gateshead? They're not well. Mr. John died last week. Mr. John? Yes, and his mother is not bearing it well. I listened, horrified, as he detailed John's decline into ruin and his mother's resulting stroke. Mrs. Reed had been calling for me, and her daughters finally sent for me. Robert wanted to take me back early the next morning. Yes, Robert, I'll be ready, I assured him, sensing it was a duty I could not ignore. I found Mr. Rochester in the billiard room. Miss Ingram looked at me disdainfully as I approached him. Mr. Rochester, I said softly. What is it, Jane? He asked, following me out. I need leave for a week or 2. To do what? To see a sick lady who has sent for me. Who is she? Mrs. Reed of Gateshead, my aunt. He seemed taken aback, but after some thought, agreed. You'll need money, he said, giving me a note for £50. I protested, taking only what was due. The next morning, I left Thornfield. At Gateshead, Bessie welcomed me warmly, and I asked about Mrs. Reed. She's alive but not well. She's been asking for you, Bessie said. I rested and had tea with Bessie before heading to the hall. The sight of the familiar rooms brought back a flood of memories, but the living occupants had changed beyond recognition. Eliza, severe and ascetic, greeted me with cold indifference. Georgiana, plump and languid, measured me with haughty disdain. Despite their aloofness, I felt an unexpected ease. Their opinions no longer mattered. "How is Mrs. Reed?" I asked Georgiana. "She's very poorly. I doubt you can see her tonight." "I'll ask Bessie," I said, and went to find her. Bessie soon reported that Mrs. Reed was awake and could see me. Entering her room, I was struck by the sight of the once formidable woman, now frail and sunken. Time had not softened her harsh features, but I felt only a desire to forgive and be reconciled. "Is this Jane Eyre?" she asked. "Yes, Aunt Reed, how are you?" Her response was cold. Her hand withdrew from mine. Her opinion of me remained unchanged, but I was determined to stay and fulfill her request to see me. "You sent for me," I said. "I'm here and will stay until you're better, or—" She interrupted with complaints about the past, her grievances spilling out. I listened, patient and unmoved. She spoke of her son, John, and the ruin he brought upon them. Her anger and bitterness seemed undiminished. Bessie persuaded her to take a sedative, and she soon fell into a doze. Days passed, Mrs. Reed fluctuating between delirium and lethargy. Georgiana and Eliza remained distant, absorbed in their own lives. One day, Mrs. Reed, lucid for a moment, asked for me. She confessed to breaking her promise to care for me and revealed a letter from my uncle, John Eyre, wanting to adopt me. She had told him I was dead. "If you could forgive me," she began, but the effort was too much. She lapsed back into incoherence. I stayed by her side until she passed, her face still bearing the mark of her unyielding spirit. Eliza and I viewed her body, Georgiana too distraught to join us. Eliza remarked on her mother's shortened life, then left the room. I felt no tears, only a sombre recognition of a life marked by bitterness and regret. Chapter 22. The Undertones of Departure. Mr. Rochester had granted me a single week of leave, yet a month slipped by before I departed Gateshead. My exit was delayed by Georgiana's pleading. She feared being left alone with Eliza, who offered neither sympathy nor support. Her uncle, Mr. Gibson, had arrived to oversee the funeral and family matters, and Georgiana awaited his permission to travel to London. Thus, I endured her selfish lamentations, her idle hands, while mine busied themselves with her packing and sewing. I often thought, if our companionship were permanent, cousin, I would demand more than idle tears and shifting burdens. You'd share the load, or it would lie unheeded. When Georgiana finally left, Eliza requested my presence for another week. She was immersed in mysterious preparations, her door locked, emerging only to issue curt instructions. She wanted me to manage the house, see callers, and answer notes of condolence. One morning she declared me free. "Thank you for your valuable services, Jane. There's a marked difference between living with you and Georgiana. You fulfill your role without burdening others. Tomorrow I depart for the continent, to a religious house near Lisle, a nunnery, as you'd call it. I seek solace and study, and perhaps the veil." Her resolution elicited no surprise, no argument. "The vocation suits you," I thought. "May it bring you peace." "Goodbye, Cousin Jane Eyre," she said, her voice void of warmth. "You have sense. And you, Cousin Eliza, will soon be walled in a convent. It's fitting. Farewell." With that, our paths diverged. Eliza would become a superior at her convent, while Georgiana would marry a wealthy, worn-out man of fashion. Their lives, like threads in a worn tapestry, would continue to weave their separate, predestined patterns. Returning to Thornfield felt foreign, for I had never experienced the sensation of homecoming. The journey was a tedious blur, 50 miles each day, a night spent in an inn. Memories of Mrs. Reed's death, the funeral, and my cousins drifted through my mind, mingling with the weariness of travel. I anticipated Thornfield, unsure of my stay. Mrs. Fairfax's letters hinted at Mr. Rochester's departure for London, likely to arrange his wedding to Miss Ingram. The thought unsettled me. I dreamt of Miss Ingram barring Thornfield's gates, with Mr. Rochester watching, arms folded, a sardonic smile playing on his lips. I chose not to inform Mrs. Fairfax of my exact return date. Preferring solitude, I walked the distance from Millcote. It was a soft summer evening, the fields whispering of hay and hope, the sky a canvas of promises. As I neared Thornfield, my heart quickened with a mix of dread and joy. "What are you thinking?" I scolded myself. "Mrs. Fairfax and Adele will welcome you, but he won't." Yet youth is headstrong, inexperience blind. The mere thought of seeing Mr. Rochester again was intoxicating. I hurried on, ignoring the newborn agony that clawed at my heart. Crossing the last field, I saw Mr. Rochester at a stile, book and pencil in hand. He looked up, and my nerves betrayed me. I felt a tremor I'd not expected. "I will go back," I decided, but his voice halted me. "Hello, come on!" I moved towards him, my mind in a daze, striving for calm, my veil a feeble shield against my tumultuous emotions. "And this is Jane Eyre? Come from Millcote on foot, just like you, to arrive quietly, like a ghost. What have you been doing?" "My aunt is dead," I replied simply. He laughed, a sound both comforting and cutting. "Back from the other world, Jane? You always surprise me. A whole month gone, and forgetting me, I'll wager." His words, though lightly spoken, held a balm. They hinted at a significance I dared not acknowledge. He referred to Thornfield as my home. Oh, how I wished it were true. "I've been to London," he continued. "Mrs. Fairfax must have told you." "She did," I said. "Everyone knows your errand." "See the carriage, Jane. Tell me if it suits Mrs. Rochester. Do you have a charm to make me handsome?" "It's beyond magic," I thought. "A loving eye is all you need." He smiled, a rare and genuine smile, lighting my heart. "Pass, Janet," he said, stepping aside. "Go home to your friend's threshold." I obeyed silently, yet an impulse made me turn back. "Thank you, Mr. Rochester. I'm glad to be back. With you is my home." Rushing on, I found Adele overjoyed, Mrs. Fairfax welcoming, and even Sophie smiling. Their affection was a soothing balm. That evening I blocked out thoughts of the future, savouring the moment of peace. Mr. Rochester entered, taking pleasure in our amiable group. His presence sparked a fragile hope that perhaps, even after his marriage, he might keep us together. A fortnight passed in uncertain calm, no mention of the wedding, no preparations. I asked Mrs. Fairfax daily, but her answers remained the same. Mr. Rochester's behaviour confused me. He neither visited Ingram Park nor showed signs of impending marriage. Hope fluttered within me, unbidden and foolish, that perhaps the engagement was off. In his presence my spirits lifted despite myself. Never had he been kinder. Never had I loved him more. Chapter 23. The Crimson Threads of Dusk. A magnificent midsummer bathed England in a cascade of golden light. The skies, clear and infinite, seemed borrowed from a Mediterranean dream. The hay was gathered, the fields around Thornfield glowed green and serene, and the roads lay white and baked under the relentless sun. Trees stood in their dark prime. Hedges and woods offered a contrast to the luminous meadows, each corner of the landscape whispering secrets of ancient days and present mysteries. On Midsummer Eve, Adele, exhausted from gathering wild strawberries, fell asleep with the sun. I watched her drift into dreams before slipping into the garden. This was the hour of enchantment, when day's fervent fires relinquished their hold, and the dew cooled the parched earth. The western sky, devoid of the sun's grandeur, was a vast canvas of solemn purple, tinged with the glow of red jewels and furnace flames at one peak. The east held its own charm, a deep blue backdrop for a single rising star, soon to be joined by the moon. I strolled along the pavement, but a familiar, subtle scent, Mr. Rochester's cigar, wafted from a window. The library casement stood ajar, a mere handbreadth, and I knew I might be watched. Seeking solitude, I ventured into the orchard, the most Edenic corner of the grounds. Enclosed by high walls and shielded by a beech avenue, it offered sanctuary. Here, flowers and trees thrived, and a winding path led to a giant horse chestnut, its base circled by a seat. In this secluded haven, I felt as if I could linger forever. As I wandered, the rising moon's light enticed me towards the upper part of the enclosure. Yet a familiar fragrance halted my steps once more. Sweetbriar, jasmine, and rose had long surrendered their evening incense. But this new scent, unmistakably, was Mr. Rochester's cigar. I turned to flee, but found my escape blocked. Mr. Rochester entered the orchard, his presence unavoidable. I retreated into an ivy recess, hoping he would pass by unnoticed. But he did not. He wandered leisurely, examining the gooseberry trees and sampling cherries. A great moth fluttered past me, landing near him. "Jane, come and look at this fellow," he called softly, as if his shadow had eyes and ears. Startled, I approached. "Look at his wings," he remarked. "They remind me of a West Indian insect, rare in England." The moth flew away, and I retreated, but Mr. Rochester followed. "Turn back, Jane," he said at the wicket. "On such a night, it is a sin to be indoors." Though my tongue often found quick responses, it failed me now. I didn't want to walk alone with him in the orchard's shadows, yet I could find no excuse to leave. His composure and gravity shamed my confusion. "Jane," he began again as we wandered down the laurel walk, "Thornfield is lovely in summer, isn't it?" "Yes, sir." "You must be attached to it, with your love for natural beauty and your sense of belonging." "I am." "And you've grown fond of little Adele and Mrs. Fairfax?" "Yes, sir." "Pity," he sighed. "Events in this life rarely let us rest in one place." "Must I leave Thornfield, sir?" "I believe you must, Jane. I am sorry, but I believe you must." The blow struck, but I did not fall. "Well, sir, I'll be ready when the order comes." "It's come now. I must give it tonight." "Then you are getting married, sir?" "Yes, precisely. Soon." "To Miss Ingram?" "Yes, and you were wise to suggest you and Adele should leave. I've made it my law. Adele must go to school, and you must find a new position." "I'll advertise immediately, sir." I could barely finish my sentence, my voice faltering. "In about a month, I hope to be a bridegroom. I will find you a position." "Thank you, sir." "I've already heard of a place through my future mother-in-law, Mrs. O'Gall, in Ireland." "It's far, sir." "No matter, Jane. You'll manage." "Not the voyage, but the distance. From England, from Thornfield, and from you, sir." I spoke involuntarily, tears welling up. "It is a long way," I repeated. "Yes, and when you reach Bitternut Lodge, I'll never see you again. We've been good friends, Jane." "Yes, sir." "And friends like to spend their last moments together. Let's sit by the chestnut tree." We sat in silence. He asked, "Jane, do you think we're akin?" My heart was still. "Because I feel as if a string tied to my left rib is knotted to a similar string in you. If the distance breaks it, I'd bleed inwardly. You'd forget me." "I never would, sir." "Listen to the nightingale, Jane." Its song broke my composure, and I wept, my spirit rising to speak. "I love Thornfield. I've lived here, untrampled, with minds that inspire me. I love you, Mr. Rochester. The thought of leaving is like facing death." "Where do you see the necessity?" he asked. "You've placed it before me." "In Miss Ingram." "Yes." "But I have no bride." "But you will." "No, Jane, you must stay." "I can't stay to become nothing. I am not soulless or heartless. If I were beautiful and rich, I'd make it hard for you to leave me. We are equals." "Equal," he repeated, embracing me. "Yes, equal. Marry me, Jane." I struggled to believe. "But you are engaged." "Not to Miss Ingram. I love you, Jane." "I need to see your face in the moonlight." He turned, his features marked by earnestness. "Jane, accept me. Say, Edward, I will marry you." "Are you serious? Do you love me?" "I do." Then, sir, I will marry you. Dear Edward, I whispered, come to me, Jane. Make my happiness. I thought only of the bliss, but the chestnut tree groaned and the wind roared. We must go in, he said, guiding me through the rain. Mrs. Fairfax watched us, but I smiled and ran upstairs, joy overpowering every other feeling. In the morning, Adele told me the chestnut tree had been struck by lightning, split in two. Chapter 24. The Mirage of a Morning. I rose with the dawn, shaking off the remnants of sleep like a bird shedding water. My thoughts were tangled, like the tendrils of a vine in a storm. Was it a dream? This newfound reality, this promise of love, seemed too fragile to touch, as if it might dissolve in the light of day. As I dressed, my reflection in the mirror caught my eye. The woman staring back was unfamiliar, yet undeniably myself. My usually plain face bore a glow, an inner light ignited by hope and joy. My eyes, typically cautious, now shimmered with a secret vitality. I selected a simple summer dress, its lightness matching the buoyancy of my mood, and descended the stairs. The world outside mirrored my internal transformation. The storm had passed, leaving a brilliant June morning in its wake. The air was fresh, as if nature itself was exhaling in relief. A beggar woman and her child approached, their appearance a stark contrast to my joy. Impulsively, I gave them all the money in my purse. The birds sang, and I felt as if my heart was composing a symphony. Mrs. Fairfax's sombre expression as she called me to breakfast was a jarring note. Her usual warmth was replaced by a chilly formality. I could not explain my elation to her. Mr. Rochester must be the one to clarify. I ate sparingly, impatience driving me back upstairs, where I met Adele. "Where are you going? It is time for lessons," I said. "Mr. Rochester has sent me away to the nursery." "Where is he?" "In there," she pointed, and I entered to find him waiting. "Come and bid me good morning," he said, and his embrace, his kiss, felt as natural as breathing. "Jane, you look radiant this morning," he observed. His words transformed me, weaving a tapestry of beauty and belonging around my plain features. "It is Jane Eyre, sir," I replied, grounding myself in the familiarity of my name. "Soon to be Jane Rochester," he added, his voice both thrilling and terrifying. The very sound of it sent a shiver through me, a blend of joy and dread. "You blush, and now you are pale, Jane. What is the matter?" "Because you gave me a new name, Jane Rochester. It feels strange." "Yet it will be your name soon, Mrs. Rochester, Fairfax Rochester's bride." "It seems like a fairy tale, sir. Complete happiness is not meant for mortals." "But I will make it real. Today, I sent for the heirloom jewels. You shall have every privilege, every luxury." "Please, sir, no jewels. They feel unnatural to me. I prefer simplicity." "I will adorn you with diamonds, Jane. You are my queen." "No, sir. Speak to me as I am, your plain, Quakerish governess." "You are a beauty in my eyes, Jane." "Do not flatter me, sir. I am not one to be deluded by false grandeur." He continued, undeterred, promising to transform my world. His words, though spoken in jest, revealed a deeper longing, a desire to elevate me to a status that society would recognize and respect. "I shall take you to Millcote today. You must choose some dresses for our wedding." "Shall I travel with you, sir?" "You shall see the world with me, Jane. We will visit Paris, Rome, Naples. You will learn to value yourself by just comparison with others." I laughed, a blend of nervousness and disbelief. "I am no angel, Mr. Rochester. I am only myself." "And that is who I love. Your spirit, your fire. You master me, Jane." "Had you ever loved such a character before?" "Never. You are unique, Jane." I smiled, thinking of ancient heroes charmed by their seductresses. "You must be careful, sir, not to fall victim to your own desires." He laughed, his eyes gleaming. "Ask me anything, Jane. I am at your mercy. Do not send for the jewels, and do not crown me with roses. Let us keep to what is real." Your request is granted, but ask me something more. Communicate your intentions to Mrs. Fairfax. She deserves to know. Very well, I will speak with her. Now, go prepare for our trip to Millcote. I hurried to dress, and when I returned, Mrs. Fairfax was bewildered. Miss Eyre, has Mr. Rochester truly asked you to marry him? Yes, he has, I confirmed. And you have accepted? Yes. She looked at me, struggling to comprehend. I could never have imagined it. He is a proud man. Are you sure it is for love? Her doubt stung, but I reassured her. Yes, it is for love. Adele burst in, asking to join us. At my insistence, Mr. Rochester relented, though reluctantly. His mood shifted, the chill of Mrs. Fairfax's warnings mingling with his usual warmth. As we travelled to Millcote, he spun tales of fairies and moons, distracting Adele with whimsical stories. Yet, beneath the surface, the tension between us simmered. The silk warehouse was a trial. He insisted on extravagant choices, but I negotiated for simplicity. His stubbornness tested my patience, and I felt a pang of irritation. His desire to lavish me with wealth clashed with my need for authenticity. Back at Thornfield, I resolved to maintain my independence, to write to my uncle in Madeira, and secure a future not entirely dependent on Mr. Rochester's generosity. In the evening, I kept our interaction light and playful, teasing him with sharp wit to prevent any descent into sentimentality. He was both frustrated and entertained, a dynamic that suited us both. Despite the challenges, I knew I was loved, and in that love, I found a strength I had never known. Yet I was determined not to lose myself in the process. The future loomed uncertain, but for now I held my ground, preparing for whatever lay ahead. Chapter 25. The Eve of a New Dawn. The month of courtship had dwindled away, its final hours slipping through my fingers like grains of sand. The bridal day loomed ahead, inexorable and indifferent to my mounting trepidation. My preparations were complete, trunks packed, locked, and aligned like soldiers ready for departure. Tomorrow, Jane Eyre would vanish, and Jane Rochester would take her place, an identity as yet unknown to me. The name Mrs. Rochester on the address cards felt like an ill-fitting garment, still foreign and unreal. It was as if she were a ghost, waiting to materialize from the mist of uncertainty. As evening fell, a feverish restlessness seized me. The closet across from my dressing table held my wedding attire, its spectral shimmer casting an eerie glow in the dim light. The pearl-colored gown and vaporous veil seemed like relics from another world. "You are not me yet," I murmured to the wraith-like garments. "I need to feel the wind." The anticipation of change was not the sole cause of my agitation. An inexplicable unease gnawed at my mind, a shadow from the previous night. Mr. Rochester had been absent, attending to business at a distant estate. I awaited his return, desperate to unburden my mind and seek his counsel on the enigma that haunted me. Stay with me, reader. When I share my secret with him, you shall share it too. Driven by the wind's relentless howl, I sought refuge in the orchard. The trees bowed under the gale, their branches locked in a mournful dance. The chestnut tree stood as a testament to ruin, a split trunk, gasping like a wounded creature. Its once vibrant boughs were dead, destined to fall in the coming winter. Yet the roots clung together, a poignant symbol of resilience amidst decay. "You did right to hold fast to each other," I whispered, as if the tree could hear me. The moon, blood-red and veiled in clouds, cast a fleeting glance through the fissure, reflecting my own bewilderment. The wind's lament echoed my own, and I fled its sorrowful call. I wandered through the orchard, gathering fallen apples, separating the ripe from the unripe. The simple act grounded me, yet my restlessness persisted. I returned to the house, ensuring the library fire was lit, arranging Mr. Rochester's chair by the hearth. As the clock struck 10, impatience drove me to the gates, hoping to glimpse his approach. The wind roared through the trees, but the road remained empty, a long pale line under the moon's intermittent glow. A tear of frustration blurred my vision. The night darkened, rain began to fall, and my anxiety swelled. "I wish he would come," I cried into the storm. Fear and foreboding gnawed at my heart, each minute of delay amplifying my dread. Unable to endure the wait, I set out along the road. Not far from Thornfield, I heard the sound of hoofbeats, Mr. Rochester riding hard. Relief surged through me. He saw me, waved his hat, and I ran to meet him. "There you are!" he exclaimed, bending from the saddle. "You can't do without me, can you? Come on, let's get you out of this rain." He lifted me up before him, his warmth and presence dissolving my fears. Yet, he sensed my distress. "What's wrong, Jane? Why are you out here?" "Nothing now that you're here," I replied. "I was just worried." He wrapped his cloak around me, his touch a balm. "You're feverish, Jane. Let's get you inside." Once home, he insisted I change into dry clothes and join him in the library. I found him at supper, his presence grounding me in reality. Yet the surreal quality of the night lingered. "Is it the journey to London that troubles you?" he asked. "Everything seems unreal tonight," I confessed. "Even you, sir. You're like a dream." He laughed, offering his hand. "Is this a dream?" His touch was solid, yet it felt ephemeral. "Even though I touch you, it feels like a dream." We settled by the fire, and he prompted me to share my thoughts. Midnight struck, the chime cutting through the silence like a knife. "You were away last night," I began. "Something happened." His demeanor grew serious. "Tell me, Jane." I recounted my strange experience. A figure in my room, not Sophie or Leah, but an unknown woman who had torn my wedding veil. Mr. Rochester's reaction was a mix of concern and disbelief. "It was a dream, Jane. Your nerves are strained." "No, sir. It was real. The torn veil proves it." He embraced me, his grip tightening. "Thank God nothing worse happened. But it was half dream, half reality. Grace Poole, perhaps." I nodded, though not entirely convinced. He insisted I sleep in Adele's room for the night, and I agreed. The storm had passed, and the night was serene, yet my mind remained restless. As I lay beside Adele, watching her peaceful slumber, I wondered what the future held. Tomorrow would bring a new identity, new challenges. But for now, I was awake, every nerve alive, waiting for the dawn of a new day. Chapter 26. The Eclipse. Sophie arrived at 7 to dress me, and it felt as though she was fastening each button with the deliberation of a clockmaker. My impatience burned through my skin, mirroring Mr. Rochester's as he sent word, urging me to hurry. She was securing my veil, a plain square of blonde, when I slipped from her hands and rushed to the door. "Attendez!" she cried in French. "Look at yourself in the mirror. You haven't taken a single peek." I turned. A robed and veiled figure stared back, a stranger in the guise of a bride. "Jane!" a voice called, and I descended the stairs with haste. Mr. Rochester stood at the foot, his eyes alight with impatience. "Lingerer!" he said. "My brain is on fire with impatience, and you tarry so long." He led me into the dining room, surveying me keenly. "Fair as a lily, and not only the pride of my life, but the desire of my eyes," he proclaimed, before instructing me to eat breakfast within 10 minutes. He rang the bell, and a footman appeared. "Is John getting the carriage ready?" "Yes, sir." "Is the luggage brought down?" "They are bringing it down, sir." "Go to the church. See if Mr. Wood and the clerk are there. Return and tell me." The church was only just beyond the gates. The footman soon returned, confirming the clergyman's presence. "Jane, are you ready?" Mr. Rochester asked. I rose, and we made our way through the hall. Mrs. Fairfax stood by, her expression unreadable. I wished to speak to her, but Mr. Rochester's grip was iron. He moved with such purpose that I could hardly keep up. His face was a mask of determination, his eyes a storm of contained fury. We stepped outside, and I could not tell if the day was fair or foul. My heart, my eyes, my very soul seemed entwined with Mr. Rochester. I wanted to see the invisible force he fought against, to understand the turmoil within him. At the churchyard gate, he stopped, noticing my breathlessness. "Am I cruel in my love?" he asked. "Delay an instant. Lean on me, Jane." I caught my breath and took in the scene: the old church, the rook circling the steeple, the ruddy morning sky. Two strangers loitered among the graves, their presence unsettling. They moved to the back of the church, and I sensed they intended to witness our ceremony. Mr. Rochester didn't see them. His eyes were fixed on me, searching for reassurance. We entered the humble temple, the priest and clerk waiting at the altar. The strangers stood by the Rochester vault, examining the tombs. My heart pounded as the service began. The clergyman's voice echoed in the quiet space, outlining the solemnity of matrimony. "I require and charge you both, if either of you know any impediment why ye may not lawfully be joined together in matrimony, ye do now confess it," he intoned. The pause followed, customary yet dreadful, in its expectation of silence. But the silence shattered. "The marriage cannot go on. I declare the existence of an impediment," a voice rang out. The clergyman looked up, bewildered. Mr. Rochester stiffened, his grip on my hand tightening painfully. "Proceed," he commanded. But the voice continued. "I am in a condition to prove my allegation. An insuperable impediment to this marriage exists." Mr. Rochester's face became a mask of marble, his eyes flaring with an unholy light. He asked the nature of the impediment, and the man stepped forward, calm and deliberate. "Mr. Rochester has a wife now living." Those words struck me like a physical blow. My blood froze, my body trembled, but I remained upright, my eyes on Mr. Rochester. His expression was that of a man caught between fury and despair. Yet he stood unmoved, his arm around me. "Who are you?" he demanded. "My name is Briggs, a solicitor of Street, London. I remind you of your wife's existence, sir, which the law recognises if you do not." Mr. Briggs read from a paper, detailing a marriage between Edward Fairfax Rochester and Bertha Antoinetta Mason. Mr. Rochester did not deny it. His fury ebbed into a cold resolve. "She was living 3 months ago," Briggs continued. "I have a witness." "Produce him, or go to hell," Mr. Rochester retorted. Richard Mason stepped forward, pale and trembling. Mr. Rochester's reaction was fierce, yet restrained. The confrontation was surreal, the church a stage for a dreadful revelation. Mr. Mason confirmed his sister's presence at Thornfield Hall, and the clergyman, shocked, acknowledged he had never heard of a Mrs. Rochester. Mr. Rochester, grim and resolute, revealed the truth of his wife's madness and their concealed existence. "Bigamy is an ugly word. I meant to be a bigamist, but fate has outmaneuvered me," he declared. "Come, see the woman I was cheated into marrying." We left the church, and Mr. Rochester led us to Thornfield Hall, dismissing the carriage and staff. He brought us to the 3rd story, to a room where Grace Poole tended a fire. In the shadows, a figure moved, a woman, wild and animalistic. "Good morrow, Mrs. Poole," Mr. Rochester said. "How is your charge?" "Rather snappish, but not rageous," Grace replied. The woman, Bertha Mason, lunged at Mr. Rochester. They struggled violently until he subdued her. He turned to us, a bitter smile on his lips. "That is my wife," he said, his voice a mixture of acrimony and despair. "And this is what I wish to have," he continued, laying a hand on my shoulder. "Now judge me, and remember with what judgment ye judge, ye shall be judged." The room emptied, and I retreated to my own quarters, locking the door. Mechanically, I removed my wedding dress and donned my plain gown. I sat, my thoughts a tempest. The morning had been deceptively quiet. The scene in the church, though brief and calm, had shattered my world. Jane Eyre, who had been on the cusp of transformation, was now adrift, her future as bleak as a winter landscape. My hopes, once vibrant, lay cold and lifeless. My love for Mr. Rochester, once a warm flame, was now a suffering child in a cold cradle. Trust was broken. The man I loved was not who I thought he was. I had to leave Thornfield, but where and how, I did not know. I closed my eyes, darkness swirling around me. One thought remained, a prayer, silent but fervent. Be not far from me, for trouble is near, there is none to help. The torrent of realization washed over me, and I felt the weight of my lorn life, lost love, and shattered faith. I lay there, overwhelmed by the flood of sorrow and despair, waiting for a glimmer of hope to break through the darkness. Chapter 27. The Silent Storm. Afternoon found me with my head bowed, staring vacantly at the sun's farewell kiss gilding the wall. What am I to do? I whispered. The answer, swift and brutal, echoed back, leave Thornfield at once. I clasped my hands over my ears. I can't bear it now, I protested. Not being Edward Rochester's bride is the least of my sorrow. It's the waking from glorious dreams into an abyss that horrifies me. But leaving him, instantly, entirely, that's intolerable. I can't do it. Yet, a voice inside me insisted I could and would. I wrestled with my own resolve, longing for weakness to avoid the suffering that loomed ahead. Conscience turned tyrant, gripped passion's throat, taunting that she had only dipped her dainty foot into the slough. It swore it would thrust her down to depths of unsounded agony. Let me be torn away then, I cried. Let another help me. No, the voice replied, merciless. You shall tear yourself away. You shall pluck out your right eye, cut off your right hand. Your heart shall be the victim, and you the priest to transfix it. I rose, terror-struck by the solitude haunted by such a ruthless judge, by the silence filled with such an awful voice. My head swam, my sight dimmed, and my limbs trembled from excitement and inanition. I had eaten nothing all day. With a strange pang, I realized no one had sent a message, not even little Adele. No Mrs. Fairfax had sought me. Friends always forget those whom fortune forsakes, I murmured, unbolting the door. I stumbled, dizziness blurring my vision. An outstretched arm caught me. I looked up to see Mr. Rochester sitting across my threshold. You come out at last, he said. I've been waiting, listening, but heard nothing. 5 more minutes of that deathly hush, and I would have forced the lock. So you shun me? You grieve alone? I expected a passionate scene, a flood of tears. Instead, I see a white cheek and a faded eye, but no tears. Your heart must have been weeping blood. Jane, no reproach, nothing bitter or poignant. You sit quietly, regarding me with a weary, passive look. Jane, I never meant to wound you. If a man slaughtered his one little ewe lamb by mistake, he would not rue his bloody blunder more than I now rue mine. Will you ever forgive me? I forgave him in my heart. His remorse, pity, and unchanged love were evident. Yet outwardly I said nothing. You know I'm a scoundrel? He asked wistfully. Yes, sir. Then tell me so. Don't spare me. I cannot. I'm tired and sick. I need water. He sighed, taking me in his arms, carrying me downstairs. I found myself in the library, feeling the warmth of a fire. He offered me wine, food, and I revived. If I could leave life now without too sharp a pang, it would be well, I thought. But I must leave him. I don't want to, but I must. How are you, Jane? Much better. I shall be well soon. Taste the wine again. I obeyed. He placed the glass down, stood before me, and looked at me attentively. Suddenly he turned away with a passionate exclamation, walked fast through the room, came back, and stooped as if to kiss me. I turned my face away. What? How is this? He exclaimed. You won't kiss the husband of Bertha Mason? You think my arms filled and my embraces appropriated? There is neither room nor claim for me, sir. Why, Jane? Because I have a wife already? Yes. If you think so, you must regard me as a base and low rake. What do you say to that? You can say nothing. You're faint, struggling to draw breath. You can't accuse or revile me. You're thinking how to act. I know you. I'm on my guard. Sir, I do not wish to act against you, I said. Not in your sense, but in mine, you scheme to destroy me. You intend to become a stranger to me, to live here only as Adele's governess. If ever I speak a friendly word, you'll remind yourself I nearly made you my mistress. You'll become ice and rock. All is changed, sir. I must change too. To avoid continuous combat with feelings and memories, there is only one way. Adele must have a new governess. Adele will go to school. I won't torment you with Thornfield's hideous associations. This accursed place, this tent of Achan, this narrow stone hell. You won't stay here, nor will I. I was wrong to bring you here, knowing its curse. I charged them to conceal it from you. I feared Adele would never have a governess otherwise. My plans couldn't permit me to move the maniac. I could have lodged her at Ferndean Manor, but scruple about its unhealthiness stopped me. I'll shut up Thornfield Hall. I'll nail up the front door and board the windows. I'll give Mrs. Poole 200 a year to live here with my wife. Grace will do much for money. She'll have her son to help in the paroxysms. Sir, I interrupted, you are inexorable for that unfortunate lady. She cannot help being mad. Jane, my little darling, you don't know what you're talking about. It's not because she's mad that I hate her. If you were mad, I would not hate you. Every atom of your flesh is dear to me. Your mind is my treasure, even if broken. If you raved, my arms would confine you, not a strait waistcoat. I would not shrink from you in disgust. In your quiet moments, you'd have no watcher but me. I would hang over you with untiring tenderness. But why do I follow this train of ideas? I'm talking of removing you from Thornfield. Tomorrow you shall go. I ask you to endure one more night under this roof. Then farewell to its miseries forever. I have a place, a secure sanctuary. And take Adele with you, sir? What do you mean, Jane? I'll send Adele to school. What do I want with a child for a companion? You spoke of retirement. Solitude is dull for you. Solitude, I see I must explain. You are to share my solitude. I shook my head. He stopped walking, rooted to the spot. He looked at me long and hard. Now for the hitch in Jane's character. The reel of silk has run smoothly, but I knew there'd be a knot. Here it is, now for vexation and exasperation. By God! I longed to break the entanglement like tow. He resumed walking, but stopped before me. Jane, will you hear reason? Sit down, I'll talk to you as long as you like. He sat. I struggled with tears. He earnestly entreated me to be composed. But I'm not angry, Jane. I love you too well. His softened voice announced he was subdued. He tried to rest his head on my shoulder, but I did not permit it. Jane, you don't love me then? I do love you more than ever, but I must not show it. This is the last time I must express it. The last time? You think you can live with me and yet be always cold and distant? No, sir, I must leave. Adele and Thornfield, I must part with you for my whole life. I told you, you must become a part of me. You shall be Mrs. Rochester. We'll live a happy, innocent life. Don't fear I wish to make you my mistress. Be reasonable, or I shall become frantic. His voice and hand quivered. His large nostrils dilated. His eye blazed. I dared to speak. Sir, your wife is living. If I lived with you, I'd be your mistress. To say otherwise is false. Jane, I'm not gentle-tempered. I'm not cool. Out of pity, put your finger on my pulse. Feel how it throbs. Beware. He bared his wrist. I was distressed, but I could not yield. God help me, I cried. I'm a fool, he said. I keep telling her I'm not married. I forget she knows nothing of my union with her. Jane, put your hand in mine. I'll show you the real state of the case. Can you listen? Yes, sir, for hours, if you will. I ask only minutes. Jane, did you ever hear I had an older brother? Yes. My father was avaricious. He wanted to keep the property together. He made inquiries about Mr. Mason's daughter. I was sent to Jamaica. Miss Mason was beautiful. I married her. Soon I discovered her nature. I lived with her for 4 years. My brother and father died. I was rich but bound to a madwoman. I brought her to England. I hired Grace Poole. My wife tried to kill me. I sought a companion. I found you. Sir, I interrupted, you are inexorable for that lady. Jane, I'll not trouble you with details. I lived with that woman 4 years. I restrained myself. Jane, I'll tell you all. He told me everything. The storm outside mirrored the tempest within. He spoke of his despair, his determination to end his life, his renewed hope. He sought a good woman. He found me. He proposed we live in France. He revealed his plan. Sir, your wife is living. I can't be your mistress. Jane, put your finger on my pulse. His pulse throbbed. He was distressed. I prayed for help. He seized my arm and grasped my waist. Never, he said, was anything so frail and indomitable. A mere reed she feels in my hand. If I bent her, what good would it do? I want your spirit, not your frame. Come, Jane, come. He released me. I retired to the door. You're leaving me? Yes. You won't be my comforter. I'm going. He turned away. Oh, Jane, my hope, my love, my life, he sobbed. I walked back, knelt by him, kissed his cheek, smoothed his hair. God bless you, my dear master. He answered, Jane's love would have been my best reward. I left the room. Farewell, my heart cried. Farewell forever. I dreamt of childhood. The light struck me. The moon shone. My daughter, flee temptation. Mother, I will. I woke. It was night. I dressed. I left the house. I walked a mile to a road. No reflection was allowed. I thought of him. I could go back, but I couldn't turn. Birds sang. Birds were faithful. What was I? I wept. I fell. I crawled. I reached the road. A coach stopped. I asked for a ride. It took me. I shed tears. May you never feel what I felt. May you never shed such tears. This is the end of part 3 of Jane Eyre, reimagined in the style of best-selling author Margaret Atwood. Please take a moment to like and subscribe.
Please let us know what you think about this audiobook in the comments section. We will see you soon for part 4.